Is it going? Hi everybody, welcome to episode 10 of In Air's Kitchen. We're here on Monday and we're at a new time. I was listening to different people's ideas and was thinking maybe, especially when we're doing dinner things, if we do it 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock, people can have dinner after, and so it might be better than doing this live at 3 o'clock. Alright, I'm back. We've been having a little bit of trouble with the YouTube channel. YouTube changed its YouTube video creator tool or something like that, but I think it's working again now. So I was just saying, we're doing this now at 4 o'clock instead of 3 o'clock. We're going to make some changes to make it easier for you guys to follow along in real time. We're sticking with sweets on Mondays. So today we're going to do chocolate chip cookies. And this is not something we serve at Clover, but this is something that I think will be fun for everybody, because what we're doing is we're going to make chocolate chip cookies with fresh wheat, fresh ground wheat. And we're going to be doing a lot of things over the coming weeks with fresh ground wheat, and we're going to talk to you guys about some good sources for that. This bag here is from Maine Grains. They are a supplier at Clover for the wheat we use, the fresh wheat that we use for our pita bread that we make. And we also use them for some other things, like we buy oats from them sometimes and other things like that. But they're a really wonderful company. They source a lot of these wheat berries from farmers in Maine, and they're creating a whole economy in the Northeast, encouraging farmers to grow the wheat so they can buy it and mill it, and they mill it fresh. When we order at Clover, they mill it to order for us. And when you guys buy it, you can buy it already milled, or if you have a mill, you can buy the wheat berries. So this is a lot of fun. You can also get fresh wheat from our friends at One Mighty Mill, and they mill that fresh in Lynn at their shop there. So that's another really great source. And there are some other farms in mills in New York and also in Vermont doing the same thing. Sorry for just a second. Blue's really worried about something. What is it, buddy?
Not showing.
Yeah, I think that was from earlier. I think it's going now. Thanks. All right, so we're never really sure if the YouTube Live is working, and Blue is worried that it wasn't, but I think it is right now. So that's a little bit about fresh wheat. Now, I think fresh wheat can be really intimidating to work with. It has a lot of benefits. When we buy these wheat berries that are grown by farmers in New England, we help give the farmers income, which is awesome in and of itself, I think. I love what farmers do, and I want more of that in New England. Second thing is we can give value to some crops that would otherwise be cover crops. So rye in particular is a great cover crop. It's usually just plowed under, but if we can create monetary value to it, we can help encourage farmers to use that and have a more sustainable farm economy. The other great things about fresh wheat, it has a lot of flavor. It's just absolutely delicious, and that's the way we're going to be using the cookies today. It's really, really yummy. It's also much improved nutritionally versus white flour. So when we eat white flour, we're really just eating a pretty well-refined starch. The white flour in our bodies looks a lot like white sugar in our bodies. And there's also some gluten, so some protein in there too. But most of it's starch, and it has a really satisfying mouthfeel, but it's not very nutritious. When you eat fresh wheat, you're eating the entire wheat berry. So you're eating enzymes and fats that aren't present in processed flour, and you're eating lots of fiber that's not there in processed flour. Those things are all really beneficial for your body. As we get into making bread, we're going to make fermented whole wheat bread, and when we do that, we're going to unlock even more nutritional benefits, because in that case we're going to use microbes to do a bunch of work for us and make the wheat even healthier. There's another benefit to buying this kind of wheat, which is that as of about 6 or 8 years ago, the United States wheat production has started using glyphosate. So that's also called Roundup, and it's a very, very powerful weed killer. It destroys plants, it kills plants. And the reason it's being used on wheat, and even if the flour says it's not GMO, it's still being used. It's being used to process the wheat, to deliberately kill the plant before harvesting so that it dries a little bit before the combines come through. But what that means is that most of the wheat in the US, the white flour you buy, and probably 98% of our supply right now in the United States, has had Roundup used on it, and it hasn't been washed off with rain or anything since. A lot of those wheats are also stored for long periods of time, and sometimes they're fumigated to get rid of problems with bugs and things like that. And some of those chemicals are still present. When you buy wheat from somebody you know, you get to go around all of that, and you get to buy wheat that hasn't been fumigated, wheat that doesn't have the chemicals on it, and so it probably has a lot of other benefits for the earth and also for our bodies that way. So this is my little soapbox on local wheat. You're going to hear from me again and again because it's something that I've been learning more and more about, and I feel like it tastes so different and it has such an impact on the farm system and our bodies that it's something we just need to keep spreading the word about. So I'm a little bit of a fresh wheat evangelist. And I thought these cookies would be a really fun way to start that because everybody loves cookies, I hope. And they're a really fun way to feature this wheat. And it's a little more accessible maybe than some of the sourdough whole wheat breads that we'll be doing later. That said, when I said I was going to do chocolate chip cookies, Brooke looked at me and said, "What?" She thinks I'm not very good at cookies, which is sort of true. And the truth is, in the past, I've made some unbelievable cookies that are so yummy, and I've also made some cookies that are total failures. And I hope the ones we make today are really, really yummy, not total failures. But I started, because I knew this about myself, I decided to write down the recipe because most of the baking I do and other cooking, I do it by feel. And I really needed to wrestle this recipe down so I could write something up for you guys. And I think what we have is a pretty robust recipe right now, but it's taken a little bit of figuring. And you can see behind me, the kids and I were using the baking to do a little bit of a science class, and we were talking about a little bit about physics. And this is a table right here, and what we took a cup full of wheat berries, unground wheat berries. You want to show what those look like? If I just get a couple in your hand. Yep. Yeah, just a couple. There you go, very slow. That's good. All right, well, I'll hold those up for the camera so that people can see what the wheat berries look like. Maybe hold them out like that. You got them? All right, so that's an unground wheat berry. So we took a full cup of those, and we measured on a scale how much those weighed. And that was 164 grams. And then we ground them up, and we measured how much that weighed, which was 164 grams, which is good, because it was the same wheat berries. But we found that when they were wheat berries, they were a full cup. And when it was all ground up, it was almost 1.5 cups, not quite. So really fluffy. And then we took 1 cup of an all-purpose white flour, and we measured how much that weighed, and that was 148 grams. So it was a little bit less than the fresh ground wheat. It was a lot less. The fresh ground wheat for 1 cup was only 128 grams. So the all-purpose flour was quite a bit more dense. And then we did main grains, and we took a cup of that and measured that, and that was 109 grams, so even lighter. So you can see a lot of variation. This is why a lot of bakers like to use scales, as you can get rid of this variation. And the variation has to do with 2 things. Between the all-purpose flour, the main grain, and the fresh ground wheat that we ground here, these 2 have some different content in them. We were just talking about it. The all-purpose flour is a white flour, so it's mostly starch with a little bit of the gluten. And these 2, the main grains and this fresh ground we ground here, are a whole grain. So they include fiber in there and other things. Some of those things might be heavier and they change the density, and some of the packing of it might be different as well. So what you see overall, though, is that they're much lighter per cup than the all-purpose flour. So we were trying to figure out what this might do for the recipes. I'm going to make the recipe right now with the fresh ground wheat. But if you're making it at home with all-purpose, your flour is going to be more dense. So you may want to cut down on it a little bit. If you use the main grains, you may find you want to put a little bit more in than what we're doing. And but we're going to be using this one here today, the fresh ground wheat berries. And I think that the recipe for cookies is just a little bit delicate. So what we're going to do at the end is we're actually going to we're going to cook 1 test cookie before we cook the whole batch, which I would recommend because you might make some adjustments to it. You might make adjustments to the temperature of cooking time depending on the oven that you have. So first we're going to come over here to the oven, and we're going to turn this on to 325. I'm going to turn that fan off just so you guys don't have some background noise. So we're going to turn this on to 325 so get that oven heated up. And now we're going to make our cookies. You want to help me with that, Sabine? Awesome. All right, so let's start out by getting some sugar in the mixing bowl. And we can even bring that mixing bowl over here. Make it a little easier for everyone to see. All right. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put some brown sugar in there and some white sugar. And why don't I write the recipe up while you put that in? Does that sound like a good plan?
Sure. So how much should we put in?
Let's do a cup of brown sugar and a cup of the white sugar. All right?
Okay.
And Brooke behind the camera and Clementine and Blue are all in a little bit of anticipation because I made some perfect cookies earlier today that were just what we wanted. I also made some not perfect cookies, so we're hoping that the recipe is in a good place and comes out really well. All right, so you got a cup of that sugar in?
No, 3/4 of a cup.
What's that?
About 3/4.
Oh, okay, so it was a little bit short. It's okay. So, it does matter to get the measurements right, because like I was saying, the cookies can end up all over the place if you don't. They're hard enough to wrangle even when you get it perfectly. Okay, so that's a nice cup. So, when we're measuring dry ingredients, we want that cup to come right up to the top so it's flat. If it's high, if it's mounded, that would be a little bit extra. And if it's dips down, that would be a little too little. And if we had a dip down, we might call it scant cup. This is a nice full cup of brown sugar. All right, we want to add the white sugar.
I did put a little bit already, so it might be a little.
What's that, Sweet?
I did put a little bit already.
Oh, I took it all out.
Oh,
There you go.
good.
How about that one? There's a cup of white sugar. You got it? In this recipe, one of the things I found when I was playing around, I tried to make some smaller recipes because this is a lot of cookies. But I think that when you make the smaller recipes, the measurements become a lot more variable. So I'd recommend making this size, even though it's going to be quite a bit of dough. But you can put this dough in the fridge or in the freezer afterwards, which works just fine. So we need 2 sticks of butter in here now, Violet. Here you go, Sweet. I'll put those 2 sticks of butter in there, and I'm going to write the recipe up for everybody to see. All right, So 2 sticks of butter is 1 cup of butter. So we've got now 1 cup of white sugar, 1 cup of brown sugar, and 1 cup of butter. And now we're going to put this in the mixer. This stage is called creaming the butter. And this is something we're going to do for cakes. If we make cakes, we're going to do this for some different things in the future. We might do this for some frostings. And this is an important step. I don't think I appreciated when I first started baking sweets how important it is to cream the butter, and I don't think I really understood what it meant. But you want to go a little longer than you might think, and you're really trying to beat the butter and the sugar together. There's some really cool science on what happens. I won't go into that in a lot of detail right now, but the quick version of this is you're going to do this longer and harder than you might imagine. So I'll let that go for a second. And in my mixer, it's starting to stick up on the sides a little bit. So I'm just going to stop the mixer, let it come to a stop there, and I'm just going to come down with my spatula and push that down from the sides And I'm gonna start right up again. And there's some in the back that didn't quite get all the way. So we just want to make sure all the butter and the sugar are getting mixed. And like I was saying before, you want to go a little longer than you might think you have to. So what happens is a little harder to tell when you've got the brown sugar in there, but there's a lightness that comes in, and it gets a little light color and also looks a little bit fluffy. So if you come over here right now, you see with the camera in there, I don't know how easy it is to see in there, but I'll let it go around so you can see the movement. But do you see how it's looking a little bit more fluffy now? I'll take some, try and see, this looks a little bit more fluffy than it did before. We're gonna go a little longer still. Alright, so it's starting to look much lighter in color right now, which is awesome. If you're doing this with white sugar and no brown sugar, it's even easier to tell what's happening. But the brown sugar adds a really yummy note to the cookies, so we're going to stick with that. Alright. That's looking pretty awesome. And this is one of the reasons to use a bigger recipe. It makes it easier for that mixer to really do its work. All right, let's take a look at this. So you can see it's all like more fluffy. It's become much lighter in color, which is all what we're looking for. And I'm just going to make sure I'm scraping all the mixture down off the sides of the bowl and up from the bottom of the bowl. You can do this by hand. I think it's a lot of work. You can also do this with hand mixers. When I was a kid and my grandmother would be making cookies, she'd be using like a hand style mixer, and you can achieve the same effect. So that's looking pretty good right now. And now what we're going to do is add eggs in. Do you want to do the eggs, Violet?
Sure.
All right, why don't you crack 2 of those guys in there. So when you're cracking the eggs in, you're just going to be careful not to get the shell in there. If you're not sure about your cracking, you can crack them into a bowl and then pour that in. That can be a safer way to do it. Nice. Awesome. Here you go. And so like I was saying before, this is a recipe. I love cookies, but I haven't had any chocolate, and I love chocolate chip cookies in particular. I haven't had chocolate chip cookies as delicious as when you make them with the fresh wheat. It adds a little bit different texture, and it adds a lot of flavors that aren't there otherwise. I'm realizing this might be the way a little bit. You can just put them over there for right now. That's fine. All right, so Violet cracked some eggs in there. We're going to bring this back to the full speed. Let that mix up a little bit. Again, I'm going to come over, and what's happened is some of that butter is caked up on the sides on my bowl. I'm just going to push it on down, move that out of the way, push it on down. I want everything to get mixed up really well in there. All right. Okay, I'll let it go again. And now, we're going to put that in there. So this is beating away here. We're going to add a teaspoon of cider vinegar in there. You got it? You want some help or you got it? Nice job. Just hold that spoon nice and stable. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. That's perfect. Bingo. You got it. All right, and so Violet added that teaspoon of cider vinegar in there, and we're going to add a teaspoon of salt, and then we're also going to add some vanilla. And the vanilla is optional, so if you don't have that, don't worry about that. Right? And I'm going to put the temperature 325 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's the temperature of the oven right now. Okay? So let's come over here and do some salt. You want to get a teaspoon of salt in there, right?
Sure.
All right. So Violet's going to get a teaspoon of salt. And if you want to look at the mixture, I can try and scoop some out so you can see it. So it's looking like really light and airy, and the color's different than it used to be. The texture's different than it used to be. I should mention, I should write this on the recipe and put it up when we do. The butter, in order to do this, is room temperature. So you do have to plan ahead a little bit when you make these. How's that going? Awesome. And then we're going to add a little bit of vanilla. Okay. All right, so this is done over here. Now we're going to move on to the dry ingredients, the flour and the chocolate chips. So Clementine came up with an awesome little technique here, where if you lower the bowl and then you run this at high speed, you can get all this stuff off the whisk. So we all do that little trick now. And so here we have our sugar, butter mixture. Eggs are in there as well. And we don't want to touch this too much because our fingers will melt that butter. So we want to try and do things with the utensils. Violet, you want to get some grain going here?
Sure.
All right, so we need some flour. All right. You want to grind that? So apologies to everybody. It's going to be very loud for a minute, and Violet's going to grind that up, and I'm going to write what we're using on the board. Go for it. Sorry about the loud interlude. We're almost there. It's one thing about using the grinder is it's pretty noisy. There are a lot of different grinders that you can get, and some are a little more expensive than others, but some don't cost very much. And if you're interested in playing around with fresh wheat at home, we're going to try to post some links to some of those things so you guys can check it out if you're interested. blueberries. I have a lot, and maybe we can find a way to get you some without coming in contact with each other. You want to measure this out?
Sure.
So we're going to do 2.5 cups of this into there. All right. So here, why don't I help you? Hold that up. There you go. How's that looking? 1 cup. Nice job. Okay, that's good. So we got 1 cup. Okay. It's sort of hard to scoop it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll be a team here. How's that looking? Good.
Good.
All right. 2 cups.
1.
Now we need the 1/2 cup measure. You got it?
Yep.
We'll see how well we guessed at the amount. Here, put your cup over here. A little bit more. We did a pretty good job, didn't we, guessing the wheat berries? All right, so we have a little bit left over, but most of it's going in there. That's great. And now, so I'm trying to get all those chocolate chips out. So the recipe's for 2 cups of chocolate chips. We don't have 2 cups, I don't think. I think we're going to be a little bit scant. Remember that from before? That means a little bit shy, not quite enough. We're pretty close though. And that's because we've made more than one batch of fake chocolate chip cookies as we were figuring out the recipe. So this is what we have left, and our self-isolation. But we do have a lot of batter in the fridge, so we can use that later. We can probably have chocolate chips for the next few weeks. Let's have a little bit of baking soda here too. So we're gonna mix this up, and then while it cooks, I'll talk to you a little bit about what some of these different ingredients are doing, and some substitutions you may be able to play around with if you don't have everything we have here. So we're mixing this together now. All right, and so we're just mixing it to incorporate everything. That should be pretty good. All right, it's looking pretty good. And we've been trying to do things in real time on the show so everybody can follow along, but in this case, you really do want to put these in the refrigerator for a little bit. In fact, and I have some in the refrigerator we're going to pull out, but I think maybe what we'll do is we'll do 2 test cookies right now. We'll do one from the fridge and one from this batch right here. I'm just making sure this is dry. It's wet because we've been baking cookies up until pretty recently, and just cleaned it. There we go. And Clementine,
Yeah.
you want to do a scooper?
Yes, please.
So Clem's going to use a spoon to get that out of the scooper. That way she doesn't have to touch it with her fingers. And let's just do one of those.
Okay.
All right, and then let's do one of these too. Nice.
We're not gonna do more.
That's it for now, and we'll do one more. How's that? Then there'll be one for each of you guys. That sound good? Okay. So we're really just doing test cookies right now, which I'd really recommend, because as I was playing around with this, I found that changing the oven temperature, changing the cooking time had a huge impact on how the cookies came out. So even like 2 minutes longer, 1 minute shorter, 25 degrees hotter oven, convection on or off, all those things affected how the cookie came out. So I think probably the best thing for each person is like start with the recipe I'm giving you as a starting point, try a test cookie and see how it comes out, and then you can adjust the temperature up or down or the cooking time a little bit based on how that turns out. So we're going to put these in the oven right now. And we're going to set a timer for 10 minutes. So this is at 325 degrees. This oven has convection and the convection's running. If your oven doesn't have convection, it'll probably cook a little bit more slowly. I was starting out with higher temperatures, and I found that with the higher temperature you can get great cookie, but the window would really shrink. So with the lower temperature, you're still getting the cooking action you need with the sugar and everything, but it gives you a little longer window. So I think this is a pretty nice temperature for us to cook them at. And now I'll talk really briefly about what's happening with this recipe while these are cooking. So, and substitutions if you guys need to do them. So these things right here, this is creaming together. And if you don't have butter, you could use shortening instead. You can pretty much do a 1-for-1 switch with the shortening. And then we're adding the eggs to that. Actually, all the way down here. We're adding all this stuff. All of that's getting creamed together. All the way to the vanilla. All that's getting creamed together. Separately, we have some dry ingredients. And so these ingredients we're incorporating. So we're incorporating those into the cream. If you want, I'm just going to point something out here. So we're using baking soda, and we're using cider vinegar. So baking soda needs some acid to activate it. So if you left out the cider vinegar, the baking soda is not going to work. If you don't have baking soda, you could use baking powder instead. So instead of baking soda, you could do baking powder, but you're not going to need the cider vinegar at that point. And the amount of baking powder you need will be a little different than the amount of baking soda. Baking powder is called double-acting baking powder. It has a reaction that happens that's very similar to baking soda. That'll happen with acid. It has another reaction that happens when it gets hot. So there's basically there's thermal acids in there. So there's things that once they get a temperature, they melt, and then they act like acids, and they activate the rest of the baking powder. So that's what the double-acting baking powder is about. So baking powder doesn't necessarily need vinegar to work. So this is maybe an more old-fashioned recipe where you're using the vinegar and the baking soda. But like I say, if you don't have baking soda, or you don't have the vinegar, or you don't like that combination, you use baking powder instead. And maybe I'll give you the conversion when we write it up on the amounts to use for that substitution. Chocolate chips, you see we were a little scant. We had almost 2 cups and not quite. These will still come out really well. I don't know of any good substitution for the egg, so if you're vegan, I don't know how to get this all the way for you. There's probably some really awesome vegan baking techniques for making cookies, but I don't know what they are, so maybe I'll learn those someday and be able to share them. But this one is really well adapted to vegan eating. Okay, so I think that's a pretty good summary of what you might be able to substitute or change. If you put a little bit of chocolate powder in this, you'd make them chocolate cookies. Our cookies right now are in there for, they've been in there for about 4 minutes, so they have a little bit more time to go. Do you guys want to make, I was thinking we could make a little almond milk to go with them. Does that sound like fun?
Sure, yeah.
So, so we make nut milks at home sometimes, and while we're isolated, this can be a good idea. What I usually do is I'll make up like 1 jar's worth at a time, and then I have these nice little jars I keep in the fridge. You could use a ball jar or something else. And what I usually do, if you're using a ball jar, you can use the exact same technique. I usually put the nuts and stuff in the jar so I can make sure I know the amount of liquid I'm going to need. So let's put that in there. So I just put 1/3 cup of almonds in the bottom of this jar. And now we're going to do a few other things here too. You can really make these any way you want. Let's put a little bit of vanilla beans in there. There we go. Well, I need like a little way to pull this guys out of there. Huh? So I'm going to take a little bit of vanilla bean and I'm just going to cut that off and put that right in there. You want to catch that one? There we go. Just going to put that vanilla bean directly in.
Yeah.
If we wanted to, we could add a little bit of cinnamon in there or something like that. I think we may add a little bit of sweetness in this one. Yeah, Blue's going to want a lot of sweetness. Let me measure this so I can tell you guys how much we did. I think we're going to do about a tablespoon of sugar in there, so not a lot, but a little bit of sweetener. If you're buying a commercial almond milk and less, you're almost always going to have some sugar. And you know, it's a funny trick. I haven't fully confirmed this, but I'm pretty sure it's true. Oatly and those milks are really delicious. And if you look at it, their carbohydrates are a little bit high. I think they haven't listed sugar as an ingredient, but I think what they're doing is processing the oats in such a way that they can get like a oat malt out of it, like a sugar out of it, and then they add that back in. But they're pretty sweet. Most of these milks you buy are pretty sweet because we sort of like that sweetness. Actual dairy is a little bit sweet, but for different reasons. It tastes sweet to us, but it doesn't have sugar added into it, obviously, unless it's chocolate milk, right? So we've got in here, oh, and let's put a little bit of salt in there too. Let's measure the salt. So we put a tablespoon of our sugar in there, and I'm just going to put 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt in there. So just a little bit of salt. There we go. Just a little bit of salt in there. And we're going to do another thing here too. And Blue's doing the questions again today. So if anybody's got questions, Blue will answer them or tell me what they are. We'll try and answer them. All right, so we're going to put, in my freezer here, I have some hazelnuts. And I found the different nuts make a different kind of like creaminess. And the hazelnuts are going to bring like a little higher fat in and a little more creaminess. So we're going to add a couple hazelnuts in there. I'd say that's probably 2 tablespoons of hazelnuts, not a lot. And we're going to add something else in here. This is our freezer drawer of goodies. So you don't have to add this. We can make really yummy nut milk without this. This is called sunflower lecithin. And this is something that some people use as just like a health supplement. Some people just eat this every day because they feel like it's healthy. In our case, we're going to use it because this is actually going to work to make the make the almond milk or the nut milk, I guess we're making now, more creamy and separate less. So we're going to put this comes with a little scoop. We're going to put 1 little scoop worth in there. All right. So that's a emulsifying agent. So it helps the little teeny particles of nuts that we're going to create. It helps them bond to the water and it helps them float there and not come out. And then what we're going to do is, the reason we use this jar in the first place is so we can take a good measurement. And so I'm going to put the water directly into this jar up to the point that I think I want it. That's probably good. So I don't want to make too much. So that's a good amount to make. And then when I'm finished, I'm going to put it right back in this little jar. You could do that with a ball jar, any kind of jar. The idea is we're just nothing special about this jar in particular. We're just using that to measure the liquid. And we have 1 minute left on those cookies. Should we take a little peek at them a little?
Sure. What's the foam?
That's a really good question. That's probably the lecithin in there. Oh, it's looking good. All right. So, okay. So we've got here the nuts, and we've got the milk, or the water, and the lecithin. It's a little bit of sugar, a little bit of vanilla, and I would often leave this to sit overnight. So you can make nut milk like this, just straight with the nuts, or you can let this sit overnight. The difference, if you let it sit, you'll get a little more productivity out of the nuts. So you can use a little bit less nuts, and it ends up being a little bit creamier milk. And this is going to be a little less creamy because I'm making it this way without letting it sit first. And we'll end up doing it both ways, just depending if I have one of these in the fridge or not. So that's filling up the blender. And we got to make more noise for a minute. Before we do that, I'm going to pull this out. This is a filter bag we're going to use to filter that once it's done. All right, so this is going to make noise for a minute. I'm going to start at a lower speed. Let those nuts break up a little bit. So I'm going to bring that speed up. cookies out of the oven.
They're looking really good.
Are they?
Yeah.
All right. Ah.
A little fat, but.
Yeah, so we were saying little flat. We like them a little less flat. And I think that if I wanted to make these a little less flat, I'd have to add a little bit more flour. And this is a trick we're having with the flour, is it's got really nice flavor, but it's also, it varies in how fluffy it is. So if you're not measuring with a scale, it can be a little variable. So these are some good test cookies. And you know what? We may even have time. Let's go ahead and put a little bit more flour in the batter. Okay, and careful there, Blue, don't you burn yourself, buddy. All right, so I'm putting a little more flour in the batter, mixing that around. We don't want to overshoot that, but I think that will probably adjust it for a little different cookie. Let's give that a try. Really sounds sweet. Beep, beep. All right. And if anybody has questions about this show or from the previous shows, send them our way. We have a lot of really awesome examples of things you guys have been making at home, which I want to share. All right, so let's try. We'll do one more test cookie, right? Where did that spoon go that Clem was using? Did you see that? There it is. Okay. And we'll set this timer for 10 minutes again. All right, so coming back to this, this wasn't quite done. I'm gonna blend it a little further. Will you grab a large jar? Big jar? Get down there. Looking for a big one? No? Oh, I've got it. I've got it here. We'll let this go for another 30 seconds or so. All right, I'm going to turn the speed down. All right. And that seemed like a long time, but you may even do that longer at home, depending on how your blender works. And so there's a couple different ways now to filter out the nut meat. So we want to take out the fiber and the pieces of nut that didn't become part of the milk. And I'm using this chocolate chip jar that we just had because Blue was having trouble finding another one. I don't know where the other ones went right now. What I'll typically do is this nut bag fits really nicely over a jar. See that? So it fits really nicely over the jar. These nut milk bags, I don't know, if everything was open and I was shopping place, I'd probably go to Cambridge Naturals to get that and direct people there. You can order them online. They're not terribly expensive. And what you want to look for is a nut milk bag. So you can pour this right over that bag. And that's just a fine mesh filter, and it's going to take out some of the solids that are still in the milk and make it more palatable. There are other ways you can do this too. You could use cheesecloth, although it will take a little longer. The cheesecloth is going to be a little more fine than this. You could also use a mesh strainer like this. So this is another way you could filter it. The cheesecloth is going to be a little more fine than this. The nut bags are in between, and this is going to be a little more coarse. So depending on what you're going for in your final nut milk, you can pick and choose. You can also play around with other things. You play around oats and rice and things like that. And finally, you want to put that guy back there. And we're going to do a show. We've got a lot of requests for breakfast things. So pretty soon we're going to do overnight oats. And the overnight oats that we make at Clover, which some of you might be missing, those overnight oats, we use a nut milk, macadamia nut milk, which is really rich and yummy. And we make that in each store each day. So the stores actually soak that those macadamia nuts in the water, and they blend it up like this and filter it out and make a macadamia nut milk. And then we use that to soak the nuts overnight. And in that case, we do a really fun thing. We use overripe bananas to sweeten it. So it's nuts and bananas in that milk. It gives it a nice sweetness without having to add as much sugar. I don't have any bananas because we're trying to avoid going out, so we are limited on some ingredients, but it is a really nice trick if you have some. All right. So I'm just using a spoon to sort of push that all through. I don't want to waste too much of it. And if we weren't waiting here, excited about eating this, I might just let it sit a little longer, but I'm just going to encourage it through squeezing that a little bit. Now, because I started out with this guy, and I'll just rinse that out in case it has any sediment in the bottom. But because I started with this, I should find that when I pour the final milk back in, it's going to be a nice vessel to hold it. And if you want to come up here closer, I think it's probably easier to see this with the light behind it. But you can see some of the things I'm looking at and aiming for with this. It's going to have like a little bit of, it's going to have like a little milky residue like that, which is nice. So that's like speaks to the thickness. You can see the texture a little bit. It's got like a really clean, yummy flavor. And I think that would complement the cookies pretty well. What do you think? Mm-hmm. All right, should we get some cookies out of the oven? And Val, you want to get us a couple of plates?
Sure. How long are we baking these cookies?
The timer says 4 more minutes. How do they look?
Oh, this one looks, yeah.
A little bit longer. Yep. And it's looking really good. So I think the adjustment we made with the flour is going to come out just right. You got it, sweetie? All right. Does your sister want to get in on these, you think?
Yeah.
So these are still warm. Now, you can see they're breaking up a little as I'm cutting, and that's mostly because they're a little bit too warm to be moving still. They should probably cool a little longer, but sometimes it's hard to wait. And these are chocolate chip cookies made with 100% fresh wheat, so they're going to taste really different. And we're having these with a little bit of nut milk. My favorite thing is I really enjoy scotch, and I love nothing better than one of these cookies a little bit warm with scotch. I think it's a really, really yummy combination. But I can't imagine anything that doesn't go well with the cookies. How about you, Maya? Yeah. The last cookie's got another 3 minutes left.
They're looking really good.
Yeah, it's looking really good. It might be nice to have a peek at that one when it finishes. So we'll probably dive into some cookies while we're waiting. Do you want some milk there, Vi?
Sure. Can I have some?
Of course. There's one for you.
It tastes good. Mm. I like them.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Let me taste it. It's really good. So you can adjust your cooking time and your recipe a little bit depending on what you like with the cookies. I like a cookie that's like a little bit crunchy but also has a chewiness to it, and these definitely end up right there. And so they don't taste like cookie dough, but they're not like a hard, totally crunchy cookie either. You see I added a little bit more flour. What that's going to change, these ones were a little more flat than I would like. I'd like them just a little bit, standing up a little bit more. And I think we're a little bit short on flour with the first batter, so I made that adjustment. It wasn't much. We started out with 2.5 cups of fresh flour. I probably added another 1/4 cup of fresh flour, and it got me to a really nice spot, which we'll get to see in 2 minutes. How many? Yeah, it needs another 2 minutes, but it's getting very close.
How long did we bake these?
We baked these for 10 minutes. Great question. So these were in the oven for 10 minutes. These other ones are timers on 10 minutes as well, so it's probably going to be about the same. Are there any questions coming in, Blue, that we can answer in the meantime? What do we got?
Doesn't use music choice have an effect on the what does the cookie make it? So what does it make?
So question, does the music we're playing have an effect on the cookie? I think just about everything affects the cookie, but I'm not sure if music does. But it may affect how they taste when we eat them. What do you think?
Maybe.
And maybe it would depend on what time of day. What kind of music would you put on if you were going to put the music on right now?
I know.
Oh, I know what you would do. We all know what you would do. What do you think? Feeling shy about it?
I like a lot of different artists.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's your favorite?
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift, yeah. We might be listening to some Taylor Swift right now. All right, these guys are just about done. And he's like, one more minute. It's we're just about there. And I think we're okay. We can all relax a little bit, guys. These guys were watching me today make some cookies that turned out really well, and then others that turned out really badly. And then I was getting ready for the show an hour ago, and we made a batch and they didn't turn out so well. And so we were trying to adjust it, but we went into the show a little bit blind, not sure if the adjustments were going to work, but I think it turned out really well. Next Monday, we're going to do apple pie, and that was our backup choice if we really couldn't get the cookies stabilized for today, but it turned out really well. But my grandma made apple pie in a really unusual way, and then my mom made it that way, and then she taught me, and I love pie, and we make a lot of pie at our house, and I thought I would share with you all our family recipe for that and the way we make it, which is really yummy. And it, in some ways, related to Clover. We've had pie at Clover gatherings. We've never really served it on our menu, but if you've worked at Clover for a while, you've probably had some pie. So I'm going to take these out right now, and this is a bit closer to what I would aim for as like a perfect cookie. So take a little look at that, and so you can see there's a little bit of browning happening on the sides, and it's just started to happen on the sides. It looks almost undercooked in the middle, but not quite, and it's going to continue to bake a little bit here while it's on the tray. Basically, as long as it's above boiling, it's going to keep baking, which is going to go on for a little while. I think this will end up in a really nice spot. You can see it didn't spread quite as much as the last batch and wasn't quite as thin as the last batch. So it'll be a little bit more chewy, but it'll still have some nice crunchy qualities. So these are fresh wheat chocolate chip cookies. Thank you guys for joining us. We're going to do every day this week at 4, except for Wednesday, which is Clementine's birthday. So we're taking Wednesday off. So we'll be here tomorrow, and then we'll be here again on Thursday and Friday. We're going to do some breakfast things. I think tomorrow we're going to get into eggs. So people have been asking about how do we do the eggs at Clover, the soft cooked eggs, and what are some breakfast bowl ideas we could do. So we're going to get into some savory breakfast options, and then we're going to get into some sweeter breakfast options later. And on Friday we're going to do pizza. So I think we're going to have a series of pizzas on Friday. This first one's going to be a really fun pizza that I make a lot of times when we don't want to order out or we don't want to use a frozen pizza. And it's a very quick pizza. You can make the dough and get it baked in about the same amount of time as you could have a pizza delivered. So that's what we're going to do on Friday, super fast pizza, and then on some later weeks we'll do some slower pizzas too. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you guys later.